A poor girl was removed from the guest list, but the CEO walked in and said, "She's my wife. Hello, my treasured and deeply respected family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Each time I sit to speak to you, it feels like coming home. You are not just viewers, you are the light that gives my voice meaning. Your quiet love, your loyalty, your gentle presence, it humbles me every day. There are moments when I pause and wonder, do you still feel this bond? The truth is, this space only breathes because of you. If you're still walking this journey with me, please write in the comments, "I am here." Those 3 words, they hold power, they carry warmth, and they remind me that real love never disappears. It just grows quieter, deeper, stronger. Now from the deepest part of my heart, receive this prayer. May your soul rest in peace even when the world feels loud. May your home be a haven, your smile a daily gift, and your steps surrounded by grace. May you be protected in ways you cannot see, and loved in ways that heal what the world cannot touch. May life rise to meet your kindness, and may every day offer you gentle proof that you matter so very much. This is more than a message, it's a home built on love, respect, and truth. And if you're reading this right now, then I know with all my heart you are here. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Grand Palazzo Hotel as Sandral Henry smoothed her trembling hands over the only formal dress she owned, a simple black number she'd bought second-hand for her high school graduation. The fabric had faded slightly, and she'd spent the morning carefully mending a small tear near the hem. But under the hotel's golden lighting, she hoped no one would notice. Her fingers clutched the cream-colored invitation that had arrived at her cramped apartment by mistake. Sandra Henderson, it read in elegant gold script, but the address was clearly hers, 4B Maple Street, apartment 12. When she'd called to report the error, the harried assistant had barely listened. "Just come if you're on the list," the woman had said dismissively before hanging up. Sandral had almost thrown the invitation away. Almost. But then she'd seen the cause, the Harrison Foundation Scholarship Fund, and her heart had lurched. This was the same scholarship she'd been desperately applying for, the one that could save her medical school dreams now that her mother's cancer treatment had drained every penny they had. "You don't belong here," she whispered to her reflection, in the hotel's gilded mirrors. But her mother's words echoed louder. "Dreams don't come to those who wait for permission, baby girl. Sometimes you have to walk through doors that weren't meant for you." The ballroom doors opened with a soft whoosh, and Sandral stepped into another world. The air itself seemed to sparkle, filled with the tinkling of champagne glasses and the rustle of designer gowns that cost more than her annual tuition. Women draped in diamonds moved like ethereal beings between men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, their laughter creating a symphony of privilege that made Sandral's chest tighten. With anxiety, she stayed near the walls, trying to make herself invisible while searching for information about the scholarship fund. Her worn flats were silent against the polished marble as she approached the silent auction tables, her eyes widening at the astronomical starting bids. A weekend in the Hamptons, $10,000. A private dinner with a celebrity chef, $25,000. And there, at the far end, her heart nearly stopped. Full medical school scholarship, Harrison Foundation, starting bid, $50,000. $50,000. More money than her family had ever seen. Yet here it was just the starting point for these people's casual charity. Sandral's hands shook as she picked up the bidding paddle, knowing she had exactly $347 in her checking account, money she'd saved by skipping meals for the past month. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through her desperate calculations. Sandral turned to see a woman who could have stepped from the pages of a fashion magazine. Platinum blonde hair in an elegant chignon, skin that had clearly never known financial stress, and a smile that didn't reach her ice blue eyes. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Victoria Blackthorne," The name hit Sandra like a physical blow. Victoria Blackthorne, heiress to the Blackthorne media empire, socialite extraordinaire, and according to the society pages, recently engaged to CEO Chas Drost. The woman's eyes travelled over Sandral's modest dress with the precision of a laser scanner, cataloguing every imperfection. "I'm Sandra." Sandral managed, the lie catching in her throat. "Sandra!" Victoria's smile sharpened. "Sandra what exactly? I know everyone who was invited tonight, and I'm quite certain I don't know you." Heat flooded Sandral's cheeks as nearby conversations began to quiet, curious eyes turning their way. "I received an invitation," she said quietly, reaching into her small purse. Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers snatched the invitation before Sandral could fully withdraw it. Her laugh was like breaking glass. "Sandra Henderson. Oh, my dear. There's been a terrible mistake. Sandra Henderson is Mrs. Alexander Henderson, you know, the pharmaceutical heiress. She's currently in Monaco, which is why she couldn't attend tonight." The words fell like hammer blows. Around them, a circle of glittering society members had formed, their faces showing the particular kind of cruel delight that came from witnessing someone else's humiliation. Sandral felt the walls of the ballroom pressing in as whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "Security!" Victoria called out, her voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced authority. "We seem to have a party crasher." "No, please," Sandral whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing murmur of the crowd. "I just wanted to bid on the scholarship. My mother is sick, and I can't afford—" "Oh, how tragic," Victoria cooed with false sympathy. "A sob story. Did you really think you could just waltz in here with someone else's invitation and steal from charity? How perfectly desperate." Two security guards materialized as if from thin air, their black uniforms stark against the sea of evening wear. One of them, a mountain of a man with kind eyes that seemed apologetic, reached for Sandral's arm. "Miss, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us," he said quietly, trying to preserve what dignity he could, but Victoria wasn't finished. "Make sure everyone sees her," she announced to the room. "Let this be a lesson about what happens when people try to take what isn't theirs." Sandral's vision blurred with tears of humiliation as the guards began to escort her toward the doors. Every step felt like a death march. Her dreams of medical school, of saving her mother, crumbling with each collective gasp and murmur from the crowd. She could hear them now, the whispered judgments, the casual cruelty of the privileged discussing her poverty like it was a character flaw. "Wait." The single word cut through the ballroom like a sword through silk. The security guards stopped, so abruptly that Sandral nearly stumbled. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as footsteps echoed across the marble floor, confident, measured, belonging to someone accustomed to commanding attention without raising their voice. Sandral couldn't bring herself to look up, couldn't bear to see another face filled with disgust or pity. But she felt a presence beside her, tall and solid, radiating a kind of quiet power that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "Stop." The voice was deep, refined, with an edge of steel that made even the security guards step back. "She's my wife." The words exploded through the ballroom like a bomb. Sandral's head snapped up, and she found herself staring into the most beautiful and tormented brown eyes she'd ever seen. The man beside her was tall, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and a face that belonged on magazine covers, if magazine covers could capture the deep sadness that seemed to live behind his perfect features. Chas Drost. She recognized him from the business magazines her professors sometimes discussed, though no photograph had ever captured the raw magnetism that surrounded him like an aura. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with the kind of effortless elegance that came from generations of breeding and billion-dollar bank accounts. His arms slipped around her waist, and Sandral gasped at the contact. His touch was gentle but possessive, claiming her in front of 500 of the city's most powerful people. "Chaz." Victoria's voice cracked like a whip, all her composure shattered. "What are you talking about? This is impossible. You're engaged to me." Chaz's eyes never left Sandral's face as he spoke, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. Recognition, as if he'd been searching for her his entire life and had finally found her. "I was never engaged to you, Victoria," he said calmly, though his voice carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. "That was your assumption, not my proposal, and I certainly never gave you permission to humiliate my wife in front of our friends." The word "friends" dripped with such disdain that several society matrons actually stepped back. Sandral felt like she was drowning, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This man, this impossibly wealthy, powerful man, was claiming her as his wife to save her from humiliation. But why? She'd never seen him before in her life, or had she? There was something familiar about the way he held himself, something in the gentle pressure of his hand on her waist that made her pulse race with more than just panic. His cologne was expensive but subtle, and underneath it was a scent that made her think of late nights and whispered conversations. "This is insane," Victoria shrieked, her carefully constructed mask of sophistication completely gone. "She's nobody. She's a scholarship student who works in that pathetic little cafe near the university. She doesn't even have 2 nickels to rub together." Chaz's jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "My wife's financial situation before our marriage is irrelevant, Victoria, and if I hear you speak about her with anything less than respect again, you'll find yourself banned from every charitable event, country club, and social gathering in this city. Don't test me." The threat hung in the air like a blade, and Sandral realized she was witnessing the true power of wealth. Not just money, but the ability to destroy someone's entire social existence with a few phone calls. Victoria's face had gone chalk white, her ice-blue eyes darting around the room as if looking for allies who were suddenly very interested in their champagne glasses. Chaz turned to the security guards, who looked like they wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "Gentlemen, there's been a misunderstanding. My wife's invitation was delayed in the mail, which is why she had to use the backup that was sent to her apartment. I trust there won't be any further confusion about her. Right to be here?" "No, sir, Mr. Drost," the larger guard said quickly. "No confusion at all. Ma'am, please accept our apologies for the misunderstanding." As the guards melted back into the crowd, Chaz's attention returned to Sandral, and she felt pinned by the intensity of his gaze. His thumb brushed across her wrist, where her pulse was hammering against her skin, and she saw his eyes soften with something that looked almost like wonder. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. His voice meant only for her. Sandral opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She was drowning in confusion, gratitude, and a strange sense of recognition that she couldn't explain. This man had just saved her from the most humiliating experience of her life, claiming her as his wife in front of the city's elite. But the way he was looking at her, the way his touch seemed to burn through her skin. "I don't understand," she whispered. His smile was sad and beautiful, holding secrets she couldn't fathom. "Neither do I," he said softly, "but I think we need to talk." Chapter 2. 8 months earlier. The Broken Man. 8 months before the gala. The rain hammered against the windows of Chaz Drost's corner office on the 42nd floor, each drop striking the bulletproof glass like bullets against his composure. At 3 in the morning, the city below sparkled with cold indifference, beautiful and distant, much like the life he was supposed to want. His hands shook as he loosened. His silk tie, the same hands that had signed billion-dollar deals without hesitation. The crystal tumbler on his mahogany desk held whiskey that had long since lost its power to numb the pain eating him alive. "You're weak, Charles." His father's voice echoed from their earlier confrontation, sharp as broken glass. "Your grandfather built this empire with blood and steel. Your great-grandfather fought wars to establish our name. And you hesitate to crush competitors because you're worried about their employees? Pathetic." The meeting had been about the Henderson Pharmaceuticals acquisition, a smaller company that Drost Industries could swallow whole, gaining their revolutionary cancer treatment patents while eliminating competition. It would make them billions and destroy thousands of jobs in the process. When Chaz had suggested a merger instead, offering partnership rather than annihilation, his father's face had turned purple with rage. "Either you develop a spine, or I'll find someone who already has one." Victoria Blackthorne has been more than a patient waiting for you to propose. Her father's media empire combined with ours would create unstoppable power. Marry her, crush Henderson, and prove you're worthy of the Drost name. Or I'll disown you and give everything to your cousin Marcus. The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Marry Victoria. Cold, calculating Victoria, who saw him as a business merger with benefits, destroy innocent companies and the families who depended on them, become the monster his father wanted him to be, or lose everything he'd worked for his entire life. Chaz stood up abruptly, his chair spinning away from the desk as he walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. His reflection stared back at him, designer suit, perfect haircut, the face that graced magazine covers as one of the world's most eligible bachelors. But all he could see was emptiness. A hollow shell wearing expensive clothes. His phone buzzed, with another text from Victoria. "Darling, Daddy says the engagement announcement is ready for tomorrow's edition. Just need your final approval. Can't wait to be Mrs. Drost." The heart emoji felt like a knife twist. Victoria didn't love him. She loved his net worth and the power that came with his name. Just like everyone else in his orbit, she saw him as a stepping stone to greater wealth and influence. His mother's picture smiled at him from the corner of his desk, the only soft thing in the sterile office. She died when he was 12. Cancer taking her slowly and painfully, while his father threw money at every experimental treatment available. In her final days, she'd made him promise to be kind, to use their wealth to help people, to never become hard like his father. Chaz picked up the photo with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I don't know how to be what everyone needs me to be." The walls of the office felt like they were closing in. The air was too thin, his chest too tight. Panic clawed at his throat as the weight of expectations, of impossible choices, of a life that felt like an elaborate prison, crashed down on him all at once. He needed air. He needed to get out, to run, to disappear completely. Grabbing his keys, Chaz fled his own building like it was on fire. The elevator ride down 42 floors felt eternal, each ding of the passing floors like a countdown to his breaking point. The security guard at the lobby desk looked surprised to see him leaving so late, but Chaz barely registered the man's greeting. His Aston Martin roared to life, the engine's purr normally a source of satisfaction, but tonight just noise, drowning out his racing thoughts. He drove without direction, letting muscle memory and streetlights guide him through the empty city, until he found himself in a part of town he'd never visited. Modest apartments, small businesses, the kind of neighborhood where people lived. Real lives, instead of performing for society pages. Most of the storefronts were dark, security gates pulled down over windows. But one glowed like a beacon in the darkness, Sunny's 24-hour cafe. The name was painted in cheerful yellow letters on the window, and warm light spilled onto the sidewalk like an invitation. Chaz sat in his car for 10 minutes, engine running, staring at the small cafe like it might hold answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. Through the window, he could see movement, someone behind the counter, someone choosing to be here at 3 in the morning. Finally, he turned off the engine and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, a sound so different from the electronic beeps and buzzes that defined his corporate world. The cafe was tiny, maybe 10 tables, mismatched chairs, walls covered with local artwork and community bulletin boards. It smelled like coffee and fresh bread and something indefinable that felt like home. "Welcome to Sonny's." The voice was warm, genuine, with a slight musical quality that made Chaz look up from studying his shoes. And that's when he saw her. She was behind the counter, probably early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and eyes that sparkled, even under the fluorescent lighting. She wore a simple uniform, khaki pants, and a polo shirt with the cafe logo, but she moved with unconscious grace, like she was dancing to music only she could hear. "I know it's late," she continued, wiping her hands on a dish towel, "but I make a mean grilled cheese sandwich if you're hungry, and the coffee's fresh. I just brewed a new pot." Chaz realized he was staring and tried to compose himself, falling back on the polite but distant manner that had been drilled into him since childhood. "Just coffee, please. Black, coming right up." She turned to the coffee machine, and Chaz noticed textbooks scattered across the counter, thick medical texts that looked well worn and heavily highlighted. Anatomy, physiology, organic chemistry. This girl was pre-med. "Studying?" he asked, surprising himself by initiating conversation. She glanced over her shoulder, smile brightening. "Always. Med school applications don't fill themselves out, and these books don't read themselves, unfortunately." She poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug. Real ceramic, not the paper cups he was used to. "I'm Sandra, by the way. Well, Sandral. But everyone calls me Sandra." "Charles," he said automatically, then caught himself. "Charlie, I'm Charlie." It wasn't entirely a lie. His mother had called him Charlie back when he was young enough to have nicknames instead of titles. "Nice to meet you, Charlie." She set the coffee in front of him, and their fingers brushed for just a second as he reached for the mug. The contact sent electricity up his arm, and from the way her eyes widened slightly, she felt it too. The coffee was perfect. Strong but not bitter, clearly made with care rather than just efficiency. Chaz wrapped his hands around the warm mug and felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease for the first time in hours. "So what brings you to my little corner of the world at 3 a.m.? Sandra asked, settling onto a stool behind the counter with one of her textbooks. "Most people are either heading home from the bars or heading to work at the hospital." "Couldn't sleep," Chaz said, which was true enough. "Needed to think." "Ah, a thinker." She nodded sagely. "Those are the most dangerous kind of late-night customers. They either want to solve the world's problems or contemplate their place in the universe. Which type are you?" Despite everything, Chaz felt his mouth curve into what might have been a smile. "Maybe both?" "Oh no, a philosopher." She mock-gasped. "Now I'm definitely making you that grilled cheese. Philosophers need comfort food for all that heavy thinking. I said I just wanted coffee. And I said I make a mean grilled cheese." She was already moving, pulling bread and cheese from a small refrigerator. "Besides, when's the last time you ate something that wasn't from a 5-star restaurant or a catered business meeting?" The question hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time he'd eaten food made by someone who cared whether he enjoyed it? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen a person instead of a net worth? That long, huh? Sandral's voice was gentle, no judgment in it. "I thought so. You have that hollow look around the eyes that comes from too much stress, and not enough real food." As she worked, moving efficiently around the small kitchen area visible behind the counter, she talked. Not the careful, calculated conversation of his usual social circles, but real talk. About her classes, her dreams of becoming a doctor, the elderly regular who came in every morning at 6 for black coffee and a blueberry muffin, the art student who paid for her lattes with sketches. My mum says this place is my practice run for bedside manner, she said, flipping the sandwich on the griddle. She thinks I'm crazy for working here when I could make more money waitressing at one of the fancy places downtown, but I like the people here. They're real. Real, Chaz repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign. You know, honest about who they are, instead of pretending to be someone else. No masks, no performances, just people trying to get through life the best they can. She slid the sandwich across the counter to him, golden brown and perfect. Like you. You don't know me, he said quietly. Maybe not, she agreed, settling back on her stool. But I know you're running from something. I know you're in pain. And I know you're a good person trying to figure out how to do the right thing in an impossible situation. Chaz stared at her, this girl who had known him for 20 minutes and somehow seen straight through to his soul. How could you possibly know that? Because you're here, she said simply. Bad people don't have 3 a.m. crisis moments in all night. Cafes. They don't question their choices or worry about doing the right thing. They just do whatever benefits them and sleep soundly afterward. He took a bite of the sandwich, and it was perfect, simple, warm, made with care. Real food made by real hands for a real person. When was the last time anyone had made him something just because they wanted to? Tell me about medical school, he said, desperate to change the subject away from his own pain. Her face lit up like sunrise. I want to specialize in oncology, cancer treatment. My mom... She paused, her smile dimming slightly. My mom is a cancer survivor. Breast cancer, stage 3. We almost lost her when I was 17. The doctors and nurses who saved her life, they were like angels. I want to be that for other families. That's beautiful, Chaz said, and meant it. It's expensive, she laughed, but there was worry behind it. Even with scholarships and financial aid, I'm looking at massive debt. But it'll be worth it. Saving lives, giving hope to families in their darkest moments. There's no price you can put on that. They talked until sunrise, her textbooks forgotten as they moved from topic to topic with the easy flow of old friends. She told him about her mother's flower shop, how she'd grown up arranging bouquets and learning that beauty could bloom anywhere if you tended it carefully. He found himself sharing memories of his mother, stories he hadn't told anyone in years. As the sun painted the windows gold, other customers began to trickle in. Early shift workers grabbing coffee, students heading to morning classes. The spell of their private world began to break, and Chaz felt panic return as he realized he had to go back to his life, his choices, his impossible situation. Same time tomorrow? Sandra asked as he stood to leave, and there was something hopeful in her voice that made his chest tight. Maybe, he said, though they both knew he'd be back. He left money on the counter, far more than the coffee and sandwich cost, and walked out into the morning light feeling like he'd been given a gift he didn't deserve. For the first time in months, Chaz Drost had somewhere to go that felt like home. Chapter 3. The Cafe Angel. 7 months before the gala, Chaz told himself he wouldn't return. For 3 days, he buried himself in work with desperate intensity, staying late, taking endless meetings, anything to avoid the quiet moments when he could think about warm brown eyes and a voice that had made him feel genuinely human. But every night at 2:47 a.m., he found himself staring at his office ceiling, thinking about a small cafe where someone had seen him as Charlie instead of Charles Drost, where real conversation happened over imperfect coffee served in chipped ceramic mugs. On the 4th night, he surrendered to the inevitable and drove back to Sunny's. The bell chimed his arrival, and Sandra looked up from her textbook with a smile that lit up the entire room. Well, well, look what the insomnia dragged in. Couldn't sleep again, he said, settling onto the same stool as before, like it had been reserved for him. She was already moving toward the coffee machine. And I suppose you just happened to drive 30 minutes across town to my... Specific cafe because it was convenient? Heat crept up his neck. Maybe I like the coffee. Charlie, she said, turning to face him with dancing eyes. My coffee comes from a £5 bag I buy at the wholesale store. It's good, but it's not drive across town at 3 a.m. good. Then maybe I liked the company. The words slipped out before he could stop them, honest and raw, and completely unlike the careful responses he'd been trained to give. Sandral's smile softened into something warmer, more intimate. Maybe I liked the company too, she said quietly, setting his coffee down with both hands so their fingers could brush again. That became their routine. Every few nights, Chaz would show up between 2:30 and 3 a.m., and Sandral would have coffee ready, often with whatever late-night creation she'd been experimenting with in the kitchen. Some nights it was soup made from whatever vegetables were about to expire. Other nights it was cookies she'd baked during the dinner rush lull. You don't have to feed me, he protested on his 6th visit, but she just waved him off. Humor me. I'm practicing for when I'm a doctor and have to convince patients to take care of themselves. She set a bowl of what looked like the most delicious chili he'd ever seen in front of him. Besides, you're too skinny. All sharp edges. And stress. A good meal might round out some of those corners. The chili was incredible, complex, warming, obviously made with love instead of just ingredients. Where did you learn to cook like this? My mom. Sandral's face lit up the way it always did when she talked about her mother. She says, good food is just love made edible. After her diagnosis, I started cooking more to help take care of her. Turns out I have a talent for it. Your mother's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. Sandral's smile dimmed slightly. The treatments are going well, but they're expensive. Even with insurance, the co-pays and medications. Well, let's just say medical school is looking more challenging financially than I'd hoped. Chaz's jaw tightened. He could solve her money problems with a single phone call. Could pay for her mother's entire treatment and her medical school tuition without even noticing the expense. But he knew instinctively that offering would ruin whatever was growing. Between them, Sandral had pride, dignity, strength that came from facing challenges head-on rather than having them magically disappear. Instead, he asked about her mother's treatment, listened as she talked about the doctors and nurses who had become like family, the way her mother insisted on keeping the flower shop open even during chemo. Because beauty doesn't wait for convenient timing. She sounds amazing, Chaz said, and meant it. She is. She'd like you. Would she? She has a thing for strays. Sandral's eyes twinkled with mischief. Broken-winged birds, scraggly cats, lost-looking men who show up at her daughter's cafe in the middle of the night. I'm not lost, Chaz protested weakly. No. She tilted her head, studying him with the intensity she usually reserved for her textbooks. Then what are you? The question hung between them like a challenge. Chaz stared into his coffee, watching steam curl up like smoke signals he didn't know how to read. Trapped, he said finally, the word barely audible. By what? Expectations, family, money. He laughed bitterly. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Poor little rich boy complaining about having too much money. It doesn't sound ridiculous. Sandral's voice was gentle but firm. Money can be its own kind of prison, especially when it comes with strings attached. So many strings I can't move without pulling one. He looked up, meeting her eyes. What would you do if your whole life was mapped out for you? If everyone expected you to be someone you're not sure you want to be? Sandral was quiet for a long moment, considering his question with the seriousness it deserved. I think, she said slowly, that the only person whose expectations really matter is the one you see in the mirror. Everyone else's opinions are just noise, even family. Especially family sometimes. They mean well, but they can only see you through their own experiences, their own fears and dreams. They can't see who you really are underneath all their hopes for who you might become. It was the most profound thing anyone had ever said to him, and it came from a 22-year-old working the night shift at a cafe to pay for medical school. Chaz felt something shift inside him, like a lock turning or a door opening onto possibilities he'd never considered. As the weeks passed, their conversations deepened. Sandral told him about growing up poor but loved, about learning that happiness didn't require money, just people who cared about each other. She talked about her dreams of having her own practice someday, maybe in an underserved community where she could make real differences in people's lives. "I don't want to be the kind of doctor who only treats rich people," she said one night as she restocked napkin dispensers. "I want to help families like mine, people who work 3 jobs just to afford basic healthcare." Chaz found himself sharing dreams he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten they existed, about wanting to use his family's wealth for good, to fund research and scholarships and programs that could actually change lives, about feeling like his father. Saw him as a disappointment because he hesitated to destroy competitors, because he worried about the human cost of aggressive business practices. "That doesn't make you weak," Sandral said fiercely. "That makes you human. The world has enough ruthless businessmen. What it needs is more people with money who actually care about using it responsibly." Some nights, when the cafe was particularly quiet, she would study while he worked on his laptop, legitimate work he'd brought from the office, but also research into charitable foundations, studies on corporate social responsibility, plans for the kind of company he wished Drost Industries could become. "What's that?" she asked one night, noticing diagrams and charts spread across his corner table. "Just an idea." He gestured to the papers. "A program to provide free healthcare clinics in underserved areas, fully funded, staffed with volunteer doctors and nurses, equipped with the latest technology." Sandral's eyes widened as she studied his work. "Charlie, this is incredible. The scope, the planning, this could help thousands of people." "It's just a dream," he said dismissively. "Dreams are just plans that haven't been funded yet." She looked up at him with something that might have been admiration. "You could actually do this, couldn't you? You have the resources, the connections." "My father would never approve the funding, so don't ask for approval. Use your own money." Chaz stared at her. "My own money? You're 29 years old. Surely you have some assets that aren't tied to Daddy's purse strings." She was right, of course. His trust fund had matured when he turned 25, giving him access to more money than most people saw in a lifetime. He'd never thought of it as separate from the family business, as something he could use independently. "I never thought of it that way," he admitted. "That's because you're thinking like a Drost instead of thinking like Charlie." Her hand covered his on the table, warm and steady. "Maybe it's time to figure out who Charlie really is." Their physical connection was as electric as their emotional one. Every casual touch, brushing hands while passing coffee, her palm on his shoulder as she looked at his work, his fingers grazing hers when she pointed out something in her textbooks, sent sparks through both of them. One night, rain drummed against the windows, and the cafe felt like their own private world. Sandral was showing him pictures on her phone of her mother's flower arrangements. "She has this theory that every person is like a flower," she said, scrolling through images of breathtaking bouquets. "Some people are roses, beautiful but guarded, with thorns to protect themselves. Some are sunflowers, bright and cheerful, always turning toward the light." "What kind of flower are you?" Chaz asked, acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how he could smell her shampoo, something simple and clean that made him think of summer gardens. "Mom says I'm a wildflower, hardy, able to bloom anywhere, bringing color to unexpected places." She looked up at him, and their faces were inches apart. "What about you?" "I don't know," he whispered, lost in her eyes. "I think you're an orchid," she said softly. "Exotic, beautiful, but convinced you can only survive in perfect conditions. not realizing you're stronger than you think. The kiss was inevitable, natural as breathing. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone, and she leaned into his touch like she'd been waiting for it her whole life. When their lips met, it was gentle at first, tentative, then deeper, as she responded with a soft sigh that made his entire world narrow to this moment, this woman, this feeling of coming home. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sandral rested her forehead against his. "This is complicated," she whispered. "Everything worthwhile is complicated," he replied, his thumb still stroking her cheek. "I don't even know your last name." "Does it matter?" She pulled back slightly, studying his face. "I suppose not. Not here, not between us. Here, you're just Charlie." "Just Charlie," he repeated, liking the sound of it. But even as he kissed her, again, slower this time, savoring the taste of coffee and possibility on her lips, Chaz knew it wasn't that simple. He was falling in love with a woman who thought he was someone else entirely, someone without the baggage of billions and board meetings, and a father who saw kindness as weakness. He was falling in love with someone who would run if she knew the truth about who he really was. But in the warm glow of the cafe, with Sandral's hand in his and her smile making him believe he could be worthy of something real and good, Chaz decided that some truths could wait a little longer. Chapter 4. Love in the Shadows. 4 months before the gala, the old botanical garden had been closed for renovations for over a year, but Chaz had secured access through a substantial donation to the restoration fund. Now he and Sandral had their own private Eden hidden in the heart of the city. "I can't believe you arranged this," Sandral whispered as they walked the moonlit paths hand in hand. Exotic plants reached toward the glass ceiling like nature's cathedral, and the air was thick with jasmine perfume. "I have my ways," Chaz said, trying to sound mysterious instead of guilty. Every favor he called in, every string he pulled to create these perfect moments for them, felt like another lie by omission. But watching her face light up with wonder made it impossible to regret. They'd been meeting like this for 3 weeks now, their relationship expanding beyond the safe confines of the cafe. He would pick her up after her shifts in different vehicles, sometimes his backup sedan, sometimes a borrowed car from Marcus, his assistant, anything to avoid the attention that came with his usual Aston Martin. "Tell me about this one," Sandral said, stopping before a cluster of orchids that seemed to glow in the moonlight. "Phalaenopsis Aphrodite," Chaz replied automatically, then caught her surprised look. "I may have done some research after you called me an orchid." Her smile was radiant. "And what did you discover? That they're not as fragile as people think. They can adapt to different environments. They bloom for months at a time, and—" He stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They're most beautiful when they're not trying to be perfect." "Charlie," she breathed, and the way she said his name, like it was sacred, like it meant everything, made his chest tight with emotions he didn't have words for. Their second kiss happened, there among the orchids, deeper and more desperate than their first. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he backed her gently against the glass wall, caging her in his arms while being careful not to trap her. She tasted like the mint tea she'd been drinking, and promises he was terrified to make when they broke apart, both breathing hard. Sandral's eyes were dark with desire, and something deeper that made his pulse race. "Take me somewhere," she whispered against his lips. "Where? Anywhere, everywhere. Show me your city, Charlie." So he did. Over the following weeks, Chaz showed Sandral a version of the city that existed only for them. Hidden rooftop gardens where they could see the lights spread out like fallen stars. All-night diners in neighborhoods he'd never visited before her, where she taught him that the best conversations happened over mediocre coffee and excellent pie. Jazz clubs tucked into basements where they could dance without anyone knowing, or caring who they were. "You're different when we're out here," Sandra observed one night as they swayed together to music drifting from a street musician's saxophone. The alley behind the club was hardly romantic. Brick walls and fire escapes, the distant sound of traffic, but in Chaz's arms she looked like she was dancing in a ballroom. "Different how?" he asked, spinning her gently before pulling her back. "Against his chest, more yourself, less guarded." Her hand traced patterns on his shoulder through his shirt. "In the cafe, you're Charlie trying to be normal. Out here, you're just Charlie." If only she knew how hard he was working to be just. Charlie, how many parts of his real life he had to actively hide to maintain the illusion. His phone was constantly buzzing with calls from his father, texts from Victoria, urgent emails about board meetings and acquisition deals and society events he was expected to attend. Most of those texts he ignored, letting Marcus handle the excuses and explanations, but some couldn't be avoided. Like the night he'd had to cut their botanical garden visit short for an emergency family dinner that turned out to be his father pressuring him once again about the Victoria situation. "She's getting impatient, Charles," Harrison Drost had said over brandy in his study, the same room where Chaz had been lectured about responsibility and duty since childhood. "Her father is questioning whether you're serious about this alliance. They're starting to look at other options." "Maybe they should," Chaz had replied, which earned him a sharp look that could have cut glass. "This isn't a game, son. This is about the future of our family, our company, our legacy. Stop acting like a lovesick teenager and start thinking like a Drost." But that was exactly the problem. When he was with Sandral, he didn't want to think like a Drost. He wanted to think like Charlie. Someone who could choose love over duty, happiness over obligation, truth over the careful facades that kept his family's empire intact. The contradiction was tearing him apart, especially on nights like this one, when Sandral had invited him to her apartment for the first time. "It's not much," she said, unlocking the door to a tiny studio that could have fit in his walk-in closet 3 times over. But the space was warm and alive with her personality, fairy lights strung around the windows, plants crowding every available surface, photographs of her and her mother covering one entire wall. "It's perfect," Chaz said, and meant it. The apartment felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. "Mom's at her book club tonight," Sandral said, hanging up her jacket. "She usually stays pretty late. They get into these heated debates about character motivations and forget what time it is." The implication hung in the air between them, electric and terrifying and wonderful. They'd been dancing around this moment for weeks, their kisses growing more passionate, their touches more intimate, but always with the understanding that they were taking things slow. "Sandra," he said softly, and she turned to face him, her cheeks flushed but her eyes steady. "I know we haven't talked about this," she said, gesturing vaguely between them. "But I need you to know that I don't do casual. I don't bring men home just to—" "Neither do I," he interrupted, then caught himself. "I mean, I don't do casual either. Not with you. Never with you." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "What do you do with me, Charlie?" The question was loaded with meaning, with possibility, with trust that made his throat tight. "I fall in love with you," he said honestly, "every day a little more, until I can't remember what my life was like before you." Her smile was radiant and heartbreaking all at once. "Good," she whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Because I'm falling too, and it's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't want it to stop." This kiss was different from all the others. Hungrier, more desperate, full of promises and permissions, and the sweet relief of finally saying what they'd both been feeling. Her hands tangled in his hair, and he lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her the few steps to her bed. They made love slowly, carefully, like they were learning a new language together. Every touch was a question, every gasp an answer, every whispered endearment a truth that felt too precious for the ordinary world. Afterward, lying tangled in her sheets with city lights painting patterns on her skin, Chaz felt something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before. Peace, rightness, home. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes soft and luminous in the darkness. "I love you too," she whispered back, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted like forever. That should have been their perfect moment, their happy ending to a perfect evening. But happiness, Chaz was learning, was fragile, especially when it was built on foundations of half-truths and hidden identities. The shattering came 2 weeks later, on what should have been another perfect night. They'd been at one of their favorite spots, a small jazz club where the music was sultry and the lighting dim enough for privacy. Sandral had been laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his thigh, when 3 men approached their table with the swagger of people used to getting their way. "Well, well," the leader said, a stocky man with expensive clothes and cheap eyes. "Look what we have here. Charlie Boy's been holding out on us." Chaz felt ice form in his veins as he recognized Brad Morrison, son of one of his father's golf buddies and exactly the kind of entitled prick who made Chaz ashamed of his social circle. "Morrison," he said carefully, his arm automatically moving, to shield Sandral. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "Oh, I don't think so." Brad's eyes moved to Sandral with the kind of predatory interest that made Chaz see red. "Though I have to say, your taste in slumming has definitely improved. What's your name, sweetheart?" "None of your business," Sandral said coolly. But Chaz could feel the tension in her body, the way she was instinctively leaning closer to him for protection. Feisty. "I like that." Brad reached out as if to touch her hair, and Chaz was on his feet before conscious thought could intervene. "Don't." The word came out deadly quiet, carrying every ounce of authority he'd inherited from generations of men who were used to being obeyed. "Easy there, Charlie," Brad laughed, but his hand dropped. "No need to get possessive. We're all friends here, right? I mean, once you tell us where you've been hiding this little piece." Chaz's fist connected with Brad's jaw before the sentence was finished, sending the other man stumbling backward into his friends. The crack of impact was audible over the music, and conversations throughout the club stuttered to a halt. "Charlie," Sandral gasped, reaching for him, but he was already stepping forward, placing himself fully between her and the 3 men. "You want to try that again?" he asked conversationally, rolling his shoulders like a fighter warming up. Brad was holding his jaw, his eyes watering with pain and shock. "You crazy bastard, do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Chaz replied, his voice carrying the kind of cold authority that had been bred into him. "The question is, do you know who I am?" Something in his tone, in the way he held himself, finally penetrated Brad's alcohol-fogged brain. His eyes widened slightly as he really looked at Chaz for the first time, taking in details he'd missed before. The expensive cut of his clothes, the unconscious arrogance of old money, the way other people in the club were starting to stare with recognition. "Holy shit," one of Brad's friends whispered. "That's Charles Drost." The name hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Chaz felt Sandral stiffen beside him, felt her sharp intake of breath as the implications hit her. But he couldn't look at her, couldn't face what he would see in her eyes. "Not yet, Mr. Drost," Brad said carefully, his entire demeanor changing. "I didn't realize, we didn't know you were—" "Get out," Chaz said quietly, "before I decide to make this a lesson you won't forget." They left quickly, Brad still holding his jaw, his friends supporting him as they stumbled toward the exit. The club slowly returned to normal, conversations resuming, but Chaz could feel the weight of stares, the whispered recognition spreading through the room like wildfire. Finally, inevitably, he turned to face Sandral. She was standing frozen beside their table, her face pale in the dim lighting, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like betrayal. "Charles Drost," she said softly, testing the name like it might burn her tongue. "Sandra, let me explain." "Charles Drost," she repeated louder, this time. "As in Drost Industries, as in billion-dollar empire, as in one of the richest families in the country." "Yes, but you lied to me." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through him like a blade. "This whole time, you've been lying to me." "I never lied," he said desperately. I didn't tell you everything. You let me call you Charlie. You let me think you were just a regular guy with insomnia and family problems. You let me cook for you, worry about you, fall in love with you, while you were—" She gestured, helplessly, as if words could capture the magnitude of his deception. "While I was falling in love with you too," he finished urgently. "Sandra, please, just let me explain. My feelings for you, everything between us, that was all real." But she was already backing away, grabbing her purse, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I need to go." "Sandra, wait. Don't." She held up a hand to stop him. "Just don't. I can't think when you're looking at me like that." She left him standing there in the jazz club, surrounded by whispers and stares, his heart breaking as surely as if she'd ripped it from his chest with her own hands. And the worst part was, he couldn't even blame her. He'd known this moment would come eventually. He'd known that the truth would hurt her, would feel like betrayal, would possibly destroy everything they'd built together. He'd just hoped, foolishly, selfishly, that love would be enough to overcome it. Standing alone in the dim lighting of the club, watching the door she'd walked through like it might bring her back, Chaz realized he'd been wrong about a lot of things. But mostly, he'd been wrong to think that happiness built on half-truths could ever really last. Chapter 5. The Truth and the Proposal. 2 months before the gala, Sandra's hands trembled as she fumbled with her keys outside her apartment door. 3 days had passed since the jazz club revelation, 3 days since her world had shifted on its axis to show her that the man she loved was someone else entirely. Charles Drost, billionaire, heir to an empire so vast she couldn't comprehend its scope. She'd called in sick to work for 2 days, unable to face the possibility of him appearing at the cafe, unable to pretend normalcy when nothing would ever be normal again. But hiding was making her mother suspicious, and Sandral couldn't bear explaining that she'd been foolish enough to love a man who'd been lying from their first meeting. The key finally turned, and she pushed open the door to find her mother collapsed on the kitchen floor. "Mum!" Sandral's scream echoed off the walls as she dropped to her knees beside Elena Henry's unconscious form. Her mother's face was grey, her breathing shallow and rapid, a sheen of sweat covering her forehead despite the cool temperature of the apartment. With trembling fingers, Sandral checked for a pulse, weak but present, while grabbing her phone to dial 911. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of paramedics, medical terminology shouted over sirens, and the terrifying ride to St. Mary's Hospital while watching her mother's vital signs dance dangerously on the monitors. Metastatic spread to the liver. She heard one of the doctors say during the initial examination, the words hitting her like physical blows. "We need to get her into surgery immediately." Surgery? Sandral grabbed the doctor's arm as he tried to pass by. "What kind of surgery? What's happening?" Dr. Martinez was young, perhaps only a few years older than herself, with compassionate eyes that couldn't hide his professional concern. "Ms. Henry, your mother's cancer has returned aggressively. The tumor is obstructing her bile duct completely. Without immediate surgical intervention—" He didn't need to finish. Sandral had studied enough oncology to understand the implications. "The cost?" she asked quietly. "I'm sorry." "The surgery, hospital stay, medications. What are we looking at?" She was already calculating. Her savings contained maybe $3,000. In dollars, her mother's insurance carried a $15,000 deductible they'd barely managed during the first round of treatment. Dr. Martinez's expression became uncomfortable. "Ms. Henry, right now we need to focus on how much," she repeated, her voice cracking. "Between the emergency surgery, the extended hospital stay, the specialized medications, we're looking at approximately $200,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. $200,000, more money than her family had ever seen, more than they could earn in 5 years even if they sold everything they owned. "I need to make some calls," she whispered, her mind racing through impossible options. Loans she'd never qualify for, credit cards that were already maxed out, relatives who had even less money than they did. For the next 4 hours, while her mother lay unconscious in pre-op, Sandra made desperate phone calls. Bank after bank turned her down for emergency loans. The hospital's financial aid office explained waiting periods and approval processes that would take weeks they didn't have. Even payday loan companies wouldn't give her enough to make a difference. She was sitting in the family waiting area, staring at her phone and trying not to cry, when familiar footsteps approached. She looked up to see Charles standing a few feet away, still in what looked like an expensive business suit, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. "How did you know?" she asked dully, too exhausted for anger. "Marcus monitors local emergency dispatches," he said quietly. "Your name came up in a report. I came as soon as I heard." Of course he had people monitoring things. Of course someone, with his resources, would have ways of finding information that ordinary people couldn't access. It was just another reminder of how different their worlds really were. "She needs surgery," Sandra said, because what else was there to say? $200,000, might as well be 2 million. Chaz was quiet for a long moment, and when she looked up at him, his face was full of pain that looked genuine. "Sandra, don't." She held up a hand. "Whatever you're about to offer, just don't. I can't take your charity." "It wouldn't be charity. It would be, what, a gift. A loan I'll never be able to repay. A way to salve your conscience for lying to me for months." She stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the hospital parking lot. "I don't want your money, Charles. Even if it saves your mother's life." The question was quiet, devastating in its simplicity. Sandra closed her eyes, feeling trapped between pride and desperation, between love and practicality. "You don't understand," she said finally. "You've never had to choose between your dignity and someone you love. You've never had to decide whether accepting help makes you strong or weak." "You're right," he said, moving to stand beside her at the window. "I don't understand that choice, but I understand loving someone so much that you'd do anything to save them. And I understand that pride is a luxury you can't afford right now." She could feel the warmth of his body next to hers, could smell the familiar scent of his cologne, mixed with something that was purely him. Despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, the massive gulf between their worlds, her body still responded to his presence like a flower turning toward the sun. "If I let you do this," she whispered, "what does that make me?" "It makes you a daughter who loves her mother more than she hates accepting help." His reflection looked back at her from the window glass, his eyes intense, even in the mirror image. "Sandra, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. $200,000 is nothing to me. Less than nothing. Please don't. Let your mother die because you're too proud to let me help." The words were harsh, but they were also true. She was being selfish, choosing her own feelings over her mother's life. But the thought of being indebted to him, of knowing that she owed him everything that mattered most. "Ms. Henry." Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "We need to take your mother into surgery now, but we need authorization." and payment information before we can proceed." Sandral felt the walls closing in, time running out, options disappearing. She looked at the doctor, then at Chaz, then back at the window where her own reflection stared back with desperation, clear in every line of her face. "Do it," she whispered. Chaz was already moving, pulling out his phone, speaking in the kind of calm, authoritative tone that got things done without question. "Dr. Martinez, this is Charles Drost. I'll be handling all expenses related to Mrs. Elena Henry's treatment. Please proceed with the surgery immediately and send all billing to Marcus Webb at Drost Industries." The doctor's eyes widened slightly at the name, but he simply nodded. "Of course, Mr. Drost. We'll take excellent care of her." As Dr. Martinez disappeared to prep for surgery, Sandral sank back into one of the uncomfortable waiting room chairs, feeling like she'd just sold a piece of her soul. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words feeling inadequate. "Don't thank me," Chaz replied, sitting beside her. "I should have offered sooner. I should have found a way to help without making you feel like you had to ask." "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" The question came out softer than she'd intended, without the anger she'd been carrying for 3 days. Chaz was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the hospital's ambient noise. "Because I was terrified you'd look at me the way everyone else does, like I'm a bank account with legs, a solution to problems instead of a person." He turned to face her, and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "When you looked at me, when you looked at Charlie, you saw someone worth caring about, not someone worth using. You still should have told me." "Yes," he agreed simply. "I should have. But I was selfish. I wanted to keep being Charlie for as long as possible, because Charlie got to be happy. Charles Drost doesn't get to be happy, he gets to be useful." Sandral studied his face, seeing exhaustion and pain that went deeper than their situation. "Is that really how you see yourself, as just useful? It's how everyone else sees me. My father, Victoria, the board of directors, society, they all want something from Charles Drost. Money, connections, status, power. But you—" He reached out tentatively, and when she didn't pull away, his fingers traced the back of her hand. "You wanted Charlie to eat something other than takeout. You wanted to know what made him sad, what made him laugh. You wanted to take care of him. Because I loved him," she said softly. "Do you think you could ever love Charles?" The question hung between them like a bridge she was terrified to cross. "I don't know Charles," she said finally. "All I know is what I read in business magazines. Ruthless, successful, cold. Those articles are about the man my father wants me to be. But Charlie is who I am when I'm not trying to live up to impossible expectations." His hand covered hers completely now, warm and steady. "I know I lied to you about my name, my money, my family. But I never lied about my feelings. Every moment we shared, every conversation, every touch, that was all real." Sandral felt tears sliding down her cheeks without her permission. The past 3 days of anger and betrayal were warring with 3 months of love and connection, creating an emotional storm that left her feeling raw and confused. "I don't know how to navigate this," she admitted. "Your world and mine, they're not compatible." "Maybe we could create our own world," he said quietly. Before she could respond, Dr. Martinez reappeared, still in surgical scrubs, but with a smile that made Sandral's knees weak with relief. "The surgery was successful," he announced. "We were able to remove the tumor and clear the blockage. Mrs. Henry is stable and responding well to treatment." Sandral burst into tears, relief, gratitude, exhaustion, and overwhelming emotion pouring out all at once. Without thinking, she turned into Chaz's arms, letting him hold her while she sobbed against his chest. His hand stroked her hair, his voice murmuring gentle reassurances, and for a moment she let herself pretend that everything was simple again. "She'll need follow-up treatments," Dr. Martinez continued gently. "Chemotherapy, radiation, regular monitoring. It's going to be a long road, but the prognosis is much better now." More treatments, more money, more debt to Charles Drost that she could never hope to repay. Sandra pulled back from his embrace, wiping her eyes. "How much?" she asked the doctor. "Ms. Henry," Chaz interrupted. "All of it. All her treatments, medications, follow-up care. Everything is covered. She doesn't have to worry about any of it. Charles, I can't." "Yes, you can." His voice was firm but gentle. "And you will. Because your mother deserves the best care available, and because I love you too much to watch you destroy yourself, trying to pay for something I can handle without blinking." The words hit her like lightning. "I love you. Can I see her?" she asked Dr. Martinez, needing space to think, to process everything that had just happened. "Of course. She's in recovery room 3, still sedated, but her vital signs are excellent." Sandra found her mother exactly as promised, sleeping peacefully, color already returning to her cheeks, monitors beeping in steady, reassuring rhythms. She looked smaller in the hospital bed, more fragile than Sandra was used to seeing her, but alive. Beautifully, wonderfully alive. She was sitting beside the bed, holding her mother's hand, when Chaz appeared in the doorway. "Is it okay if I come in?" he asked quietly. Sandral nodded, and he approached slowly, like he was entering a sacred space. When he saw Eleanor, his expression softened. "She looks like you," he said. "Everyone says I look like her." Sandral smoothed her mother's hair back from her forehead. "She's the strongest person I know. She raised me by herself, built her business from nothing, survived cancer the first time through sheer determination. She raised an incredible daughter." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Elena sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of machines that meant she was going to be okay. Finally, Chaz spoke again. "Sandra, I know you're angry with me. I know you feel like I betrayed your trust, and you have every right to those feelings. But I need you to know something." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. You make me want to be better than I am, kinder than I was raised to be. You make me believe that maybe I don't have to be the man my father wants me to be." "Charles, let me finish, please." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Sandral's breath catch. "I know this is terrible timing. I know you're confused and hurt and probably thinking I'm crazy. But watching your mother almost die tonight, seeing how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change." He opened the box to reveal the most beautiful ring she'd ever seen, a vintage design with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones, elegant and timeless. "This was my grandmother's ring. She gave it to me before she died and made me promise to only give it to someone who loved me for who I really am, not what I have." Sandra stared at the ring, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I know I haven't earned the right to ask this," Chaz continued, his voice shaking slightly. "I know I should have been honest from the beginning. But Sandra, I love you, not the idea of you, not what you represent, but you. Your strength, your compassion, your terrible cooking, the way you sing off-key when you think no one is listening, the way you see good in people even when they don't deserve it. Charles, I'm not asking you to forget that I lied. I'm asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let me spend the rest of my life proving that you matter more to me than money, than family expectations, than anything else in this world." He slid off the chair to kneel beside her, holding the ring box like an offering. "Marry me, Sandra. Not Charles Drost, not the billionaire, not the heir to anything. Marry Charlie, the man who falls asleep reading medical journals because he loves listening to you talk about your dreams. The man who would give up everything if it meant getting to keep you." Sandral looked at him kneeling beside her mother's hospital bed, this man who had saved her mother's life, who claimed to love her enough to give up his fortune, who was offering her a ring that represented generations of family history. "If I say yes," she whispered, "what happens then? Do we pretend we're from the same world? Do I learn to play the society wife? Do you slum it in my neighborhood? If you say yes, we figure it out together." His eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We make our own rules, create our own normal. Maybe I disappoint my father, and maybe you have to deal with people who think you're a gold digger. But we face all of it together." Elena stirred slightly in her sleep, her fingers tightening around Sandral's hand, as if even unconscious. She knew her daughter needed reassurance. "She'd like you," Sandral said quietly, looking down at her mother. "Would she? She always told me to marry for love, not security. Said she'd rather see me happy and poor than miserable and rich." Sandral looked back at Chaz, this man who had turned her world upside down and then saved the person who mattered most to her. "But what if love isn't enough? What if the differences between us are too big to overcome?" "Then we'll fail trying," he said simply. "But Sandra, what if love is enough? What if it's the only thing that really matters?" Looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and fear and desperate love there, Sandra realized she'd already made her choice. Maybe she'd made it 3 months ago in a late-night cafe, or maybe she'd made it tonight when he'd saved her mother without asking for anything in return. Maybe she'd made it the moment she realized that losing him hurt more than being angry. "With him, ask me again," she said softly. "What? Ask me again, the right way, with my real name." Chaz's smile was radiant, transformative, the kind of smile that could power entire cities. "Sandral Henry," he said, his voice strong and sure. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff and growing wings at the same time. "Yes, Charles Drost, I'll marry you." The ring slipped onto her finger like it had been made for her, the weight of it both foreign and perfect. As Chaz kissed her there in the hospital room, with her mother sleeping peacefully beside them and machines beeping out the rhythm of a life saved, Sandral thought that maybe love really could be enough. After all, it had brought them this far. Chapter 6. Secret Vows, Hidden Hearts, 6 weeks before the gala. The Chapel of Everlasting Hope bore no resemblance to venues where Drost family weddings typically occurred. No soaring cathedral ceilings or marble columns, no orchestra or hundreds of society guests in designer gowns. Instead, it was a tiny sanctuary tucked between a used bookstore and vintage clothing shop, with stained glass windows that caught morning light and cast rainbow patterns across worn wooden pews. "Are you sure about this?" Tanya Rodriguez whispered as she adjusted the simple white dress she'd helped Sandral pick out from a boutique specializing in budget-friendly elegance. It was beautiful, flowing chiffon with delicate lace sleeves. But it had cost less than most shoes at society. Galas Chaz was supposed to attend. "I've never been more sure of anything," Sandral replied, though her hands shook as she held the small bouquet of wildflowers they'd picked from the hospital garden. That morning, her mother was still recovering from surgery, still weak, but she'd insisted on being here despite doctor's orders. "Mija," Elena Henry said from her wheelchair beside the front pew, her voice still raspy, but her eyes bright with joy. "You look like an angel. Charlie is a lucky man." Elena still called him Charlie. It was one of the conditions Sandral had insisted on when they'd told her mother about the engagement, that in private, with family, he would always be Charlie. The man who had spent hours at her bedside, reading flower-arranging magazines aloud while she recovered. "The lucky one is me," Chaz said quietly, appearing in the chapel doorway with Marcus Webb, his assistant and best friend beside him. Seeing him in the simple black suit he'd chosen instead of his usual designer wear, Sandral felt her breath catch. He looked nervous, hopeful, and more handsome than any man had a right to be. "Mrs. Henry," he said, approaching Elena's wheelchair with gentle respect. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to watch my daughter marry the love of her life," Elena replied, reaching up to pat his cheek, "and like I'm about to gain a son I've been praying for." Pastor Williams, a kind-faced man in his 60s who ran the chapel, approached with a gentle smile. "Well, folks, are we ready to begin?" "We're ready," Sandral said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. The ceremony was simple, intimate, and perfect. Marcus and Tanya served as witnesses. Elena held court from her wheelchair, with tears streaming down her face, and Pastor Williams spoke about love that transforms people, love that makes them better than they thought they could be. "Charles," the pastor said when it came time for vows, "do you take Sandral to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Chaz said, his voice strong and sure, his eyes never leaving Sandral's face. "I promise to love you exactly as you are, to support your dreams even when they scare me, and to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me today." "Sandral, do you take Charles to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," she whispered, then cleared her throat and said it again, stronger. "I promise to forgive your past mistakes, to face whatever challenges come our way together, and to love both Charlie and Charles, all the parts of you, even the ones you think are unlovable." The rings they exchanged were simple gold bands, purchased that morning from a modest jewelry store. But when Chaz slipped the ring onto her finger, right beside his grandmother's engagement ring, it felt like the most precious thing in the world. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Williams declared with obvious joy. "Charles, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft, reverent, full of promises and hope, and the sweet relief of finally, officially, belonging to each other. Their reception was cake from the bakery next door and champagne that Tanya had brought in a cooler. They toasted in the chapel garden while Eleanor dozed in her wheelchair, exhausted but refusing to miss a moment. "So what now?" Sandral asked as they sat on a bench surrounded by wildflowers, her head on Chaz's shoulder. "Now we figure out how to be married," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Together." Living as husband and wife proved more complex than either had anticipated. They couldn't be public about their marriage, not yet. Harrison Drost was already suspicious about his son's recent behavior, and discovery would mean immediate consequences neither was prepared to face. So they became experts at parallel lives. During daylight hours, Chaz remained Charles Drost, CEO in training, attending board meetings and managing acquisitions, while deflecting Victoria Blackthorn's increasingly aggressive pursuit. She'd grown bolder about their supposed relationship, making assumptions about their future that he couldn't directly contradict without revealing dangerous truths. "Darling, Daddy is getting impatient," Victoria purred during one particularly insufferable country club dinner. "He's starting to think you're not serious about our arrangement." "Maybe because I'm not," Chaz replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Don't be ridiculous. We're perfect together. My family's media influence, your business empire. We could control information flow across half the city." "How romantic," he said dryly, counting minutes until escape became possible. That real life began every evening when he would slip away from his penthouse and drive to Sandral's apartment, where she would be waiting with dinner and stories about her day and arms that felt like home. "How was your day, Mr. Drost?" she would ask with mock formality when he arrived, usually exhausted and frustrated from hours of playing a role he hated. "Terrible," he would reply, pulling her into his arms and burying his face in her neck. "But it's better now." They were living in her tiny studio, officially. Unofficially, Chaz had purchased the entire building through a shell company and was quietly upgrading everything. Better security, improved heating and cooling, repairs that the previous landlord had ignored for years. Sandral suspected but didn't ask. Their evenings were precious, stolen time where they could be themselves without pretense. They would cook together in her tiny kitchen, usually ending up with flour in their hair and sauce on their clothes because Chaz was learning that cooking was apparently much harder than it looked. "You're supposed to whisk, not declare war on it," Sandral laughed one evening as he attempted pancakes for dinner. Both had been craving breakfast food. "I am whisking," he protested, wielding the utensil like a weapon. "That's not whisking, that's assault. Here." She stepped behind him, arms wrapping around his waist, hands covering his on the whisk. Gentle, circular motions, like you're trying to persuade the batter, not intimidate it. Having her pressed against his back, her voice soft in his ear, her hands guiding his. This was the kind of domestic intimacy Chaz had never imagined wanting, but with Sandral, making pancakes became foreplay. Washing dishes became an excuse to splash each other with soapy water. Folding laundry became a reason to tumble into bed together. Clothes forgotten and responsibilities pushed aside for stolen hours of happiness. Their physical relationship deepened with their emotional intimacy. Making love as husband and wife. It felt different, more intense, more connected, like they were creating something together that was bigger than both of them individually. "What are you thinking about?" Sandral asked one night, catching him staring at her in the moonlight streaming through her tiny windows. "How happy I am," he said honestly. "How I never knew it was possible to feel this complete. Even living like this, hiding, sneaking around, pretending we're not married. Especially living like this." He pulled her closer, skin against skin, heartbeat against heartbeat. "This is real. Everything else is just noise." But the noise was getting louder. Marcus brought increasingly dire reports from Drost Industries. "Your father is asking questions," he warned during one of their clandestine meetings. "He knows you're spending time away from your usual haunts. Victoria's been complaining that you're being distant, and there are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "That you've been seen in parts of the city where Drost heirs don't typically venture. That you've been paying for medical treatments for someone. That there might be a woman." Chaz felt ice forming in his veins. How much does he know? Nothing concrete yet. But Charles, if he decides to investigate seriously, he'll find out about Sandral, about the marriage, about everything. Then we need to be more careful. Or you could tell him yourself, control the narrative, and watch him destroy her? Chaz laughed bitterly. "You know what he's capable of when he feels threatened." So they continued their double life, stealing moments of happiness between the demands of two very different worlds. Sandral threw herself into her studies with renewed determination, knowing that her medical degree was more important than ever. "I need to be successful in my own right," she explained one evening as she struggled through organic chemistry homework. "If people are going to call me a gold digger, I want them to know they're wrong." "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," Chaz said, massaging her shoulders as she worked. "I have to prove it to myself." They made plans for their future during those quiet evenings. The foundation they would start together, the ways they could use his resources and her medical knowledge to help families like hers. The house they would buy someday, with a garden for Elena and enough space for children they both wanted. 5 bedrooms, Sandral said one night as they lay in her single bed, barely large enough for both of them, but somehow perfect because it meant they had to stay close all night. 5? How many children are you planning? Chaz teased. 2 or 3 for us, 1 for Mom when she gets older, and 1 for guests. I want the kind of house where people feel welcome, where family knows they always have a place to come home to. It sounds perfect, he said, and meant it. These conversations felt like prayers, like promises they were making to a future that seemed both inevitable and impossible. Because despite their love, despite their marriage, despite the ring on her finger and the hope in their hearts. They both knew that their secret couldn't last forever. Something would have to give eventually. Someone would discover the truth, and when that happened, they would face the ultimate test of whether love really could conquer the vast differences between their worlds. But for now, in the safety of stolen evenings and whispered promises, they chose to believe that it could. Love would have to be enough. It was all they had. Chapter 7. The Enemy Strikes. 4 weeks before the gala. Victoria Blackthorne had built her reputation on getting what she wanted. At 26, she had never been denied anything that money, influence, or sheer determination could secure. Designer gowns, exotic vacations, invitations to the most exclusive events, all came as naturally as breathing. But Charles Drost was proving frustratingly elusive, and Victoria did not tolerate being thwarted. "He's hiding something significant," she told Raymond Cross, her private investigator, as they met in her father's media empire offices overlooking the city. The view from the 40th floor was spectacular, but Victoria had no interest in scenery. She wanted information. Raymond Cross was expensive, discreet, and exceptionally skilled at uncovering secrets that people preferred buried. He'd built his reputation servicing the city's elite, confirming affairs before prenups were signed, locating blackmail material for hostile takeovers, ensuring that family scandals stayed buried beneath layers of money and influence. Mr. Drost has definitely altered his patterns over the past few months, Cross confirmed, sliding a folder across the glass conference table. Different locations, unusual timing, cash transactions where he typically uses credit. Victoria opened the folder to find photographs that made her blood pressure spike. Charles leaving a modest apartment building, Charles entering a small cafe, in a neighborhood she wouldn't be caught dead in. Charles sitting in what looked like a hospital waiting room, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled. "Who lives in that building?" she demanded, pointing to the clearest photograph. "I'm still working on that. The building was recently purchased by a shell company, but I'm tracing the ownership. However, I did discover something interesting about his recent financial activity." Cross produced another set of documents, bank records that should have been private but weren't, when you knew the right people and had enough money to make them temporarily accessible. $200,000 paid directly to St. Mary's Hospital, Cross continued. Emergency surgery and extended care for one Elena Henry, age 52. Daughter listed as next of kin, Sandrel Henry, age 22. Victoria studied the name, rolling it around in her mind like a weapon she was learning to wield. Sandrel Henry. Do we have a photo? Several. Cross produced a new set of images that made Victoria's carefully controlled composure crack for just a moment. The girl was beautiful, not in the polished, artificial way of their social circle, but naturally, genuinely beautiful. Dark hair, warm eyes, a smile that looked real even in candid photographs. She was young, clearly from a different world entirely, and in every image. Where she appeared with Charles, he looked happier than Victoria had ever seen him. "She works at Sonny's Cafe," Cross explained. "Night shifts while she attends pre-med classes during the day. Scholarship student, near perfect grades, no social media presence to speak of. By all accounts, she's exactly what she appears to. Be a poor girl trying to become a doctor while taking care of her sick mother." "How sweet," Victoria said with enough venom to poison a small city. "A regular Cinderella story. I assume you've confirmed they're sleeping together?" "More than that." Cross hesitated, which was unusual for a man who delivered devastating information with professional detachment. "There's a marriage certificate." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "What did you say?" "Charles Drost married Sandrel Henry 6 weeks ago at the Chapel of Everlasting Hope. Small ceremony, minimal guests, no prenup on file." Victoria stared at the marriage certificate Cross had somehow obtained. her manicured nails digging into her palms, hard enough to draw blood. Married. Charles was married to some nobody from nowhere, and he'd never said a word. All those dinners where she'd talked about their future together, all those society events where she'd played the role of his almost fiancé, all those conversations with her father about merging their media and business empires. "How long have you known about this?" she asked quietly, her voice deadly calm. "I confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be absolutely certain before—" "Get out, Miss Blackthorne. Get out!" Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. "And if one word of this gets out before I decide what to do with it, I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Cross gathered his files quickly and left without another word, recognizing the kind of fury that made smart people get as far away as possible. Once she was alone, Victoria allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to rage, throwing crystal paperweights, screaming at the city skyline, letting the full force of her humiliation and fury pour out. Then she sat down, fixed her makeup, and began to plan. Charles Drost had embarrassed her. Worse, he'd made her look like a fool in front of everyone who mattered. While she'd been playing the patient, almost fiancé, he'd been playing house with some charity case who probably didn't even know which fork to use for the salad course. But Victoria hadn't built her reputation by accepting defeat gracefully. If Charles wanted to slum it with his little nobody, she would make sure he and everyone else understood exactly what that choice cost. Her first call was to her father. "Daddy, I need a favor," she said sweetly, settling back into her leather chair with a smile that would have terrified anyone who knew her well. "Of course, sweetheart. What can I do for you?" "I need you to look into the Harrison Foundation Scholarship Fund Gala. Specifically, I need you to make sure certain people receive invitations and certain others don't." The plan was beautiful in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. The Harrison Foundation Gala was exactly the kind of high society event where Charles was expected to appear, preferably with Victoria on his arm. It was also a scholarship fund, the kind of cause that would naturally appeal to someone like Sandra Henry, especially if she somehow received an invitation by mistake. Victoria spent the next week orchestrating every detail with the precision of a military campaign. She had one of her father's media interns, a girl desperate for a permanent position, send an invitation to Sandra Henderson at Sandral's address. A simple clerical error that anyone could make, easy to explain away if necessary. She arranged for extra security at the event, guards who would be particularly vigilant about party crashes and people who didn't belong. She made sure that several society reporters would be present, cameras ready to capture any drama that might unfold. Most importantly, she ensured that Charles would be expected to attend, with subtle pressure from both their families about the importance of presenting a united front for the cameras. "The Harrison Foundation is important to both our families," Victoria mentioned casually during dinner with Charles and their respective fathers. "It would mean so much to have your support." "There, Charles, publicly," Harrison Drost nodded approvingly. "Victoria's right. It's time you started taking your social obligations more seriously, Charles. People are beginning to talk about your absence from important events." Chaz felt the trap closing around him, but couldn't see a way out without revealing truths he wasn't ready to share. "Of course," he said carefully. "I'll be there." "Wonderful," Victoria purred, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "It'll be just like old times." But Victoria's plan went deeper than just public humiliation. She'd done her research on Sandra Henry, and she understood exactly what kind of person she was dealing with. Someone proud, someone principled, someone who would be devastated by the kind of scene Victoria was planning to orchestrate. The beauty of it was that it would accomplish multiple goals simultaneously. It would humiliate Charles by exposing his poor judgment in choosing such an inappropriate partner. It would destroy Sandral by making her a laughingstock among people whose opinions mattered. And it would demonstrate to everyone present exactly what happened when people tried to reach above their station. While Victoria was orchestrating her social warfare campaign, Harrison Drost was conducting his own investigation into his son's recent behavior. Unlike Victoria's hired investigator, Harrison had resources that went far beyond private surveillance. He had board members who reported on Charles's activities, business associates who monitored his financial transactions, and social connections that stretched into every corner of the city's power structure. "The boy has lost his mind," Harrison told his oldest friend and business partner James Caldwell over cigars in his private study. "Throwing money at some nobody's medical bills, disappearing for hours at a time, dodging his responsibilities. To play house with a girl who probably sees dollar signs when she looks at him." "Have you confronted him directly?" Caldwell asked, though he already knew the answer. Harrison Drost didn't confront. He maneuvered, he pressured, he applied exactly the right amount of force to achieve his desired outcome. "I'm giving him the chance to come to his senses on his own," Harrison replied. "But if he can't see that this girl is a liability, then I'll have to make the choice for him." The pressure on Chaz was mounting from every direction. Board meetings where his father questioned his judgment, social events where Victoria became increasingly possessive and demanding, business decisions where he was expected to demonstrate the kind of ruthlessness that would prove he was worthy of the Drost legacy. "They're closing in," Marcus warned during one of their private meetings. "Your father had me followed yesterday. Victoria's been asking questions about your schedule. And there are rumors circulating that you're involved with someone inappropriate." "How long do we have?" Chaz asked, exhaustion clear in his voice. "Not long. Maybe weeks, maybe days." "Charles, you need to make a choice. Tell them the truth on your terms or wait for them to discover it on theirs." But Chaz couldn't bring himself to expose Sandral to the kind of scrutiny and potential destruction that would come with revealing their marriage. She was thriving in her studies. Her mother was recovering beautifully. Their hidden life together was the only source of happiness he'd ever known. How could he risk all of that for the sake of honesty? "I need more time," he said finally. "Time is exactly what you don't have," Marcus replied grimly. The breaking point came exactly 3 weeks before the gala, during a family dinner that felt more like a corporate board meeting. Harrison Drost sat at the head of the massive dining table in the family estate, with Charles and Victoria arranged like chess pieces in a game whose rules had been decided before they'd even sat down. "I've been patient," Harrison began without preamble, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I've allowed you to have your fun, Charles, to sow your wild oats or whatever you want to call this phase you've been going through. But it ends now." "What ends?" Chaz asked carefully, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. "Your childish rebellion, your refusal to take your responsibilities seriously, your insistence on avoiding the commitments that will secure our family's future." Harrison's gaze moved between Charles and Victoria with calculation. "You will announce your engagement to Victoria at the Harrison Foundation Gala. You will marry her within 6 months. And you will end whatever inappropriate relationship you've been conducting with whomever you've been wasting your time on." The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword, sharp and final and completely non-negotiable. "And if I refuse," Chaz asked quietly, "then you forfeit your inheritance, your position in the company, and your place in this family." Harrison's expression didn't change, but his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I'll disown you completely and name your cousin Marcus as my heir. You'll have nothing, no money, no connections, no power to help anyone, including whatever little charity case has captured your attention." Victoria watched this exchange with barely concealed satisfaction, her smile sweet enough to cause cavities. "Darling, surely you see that this is for the best. We're perfect for each other, and think of all the good we could do with our combined resources." Chaz looked at her, really looked at her, and saw everything he'd spent his life trying to avoid becoming. Cold calculation disguised as charm, ruthless ambition masked as concern, the complete absence of genuine warmth or empathy replaced by an endless hunger for power and status. "I need time to consider," he said finally. "You have until the gala," Harrison replied. 3 weeks to come to your senses. After that, the choice will be made for you." As the dinner ended and Victoria kissed his cheek goodbye with possessive satisfaction, Chaz felt the walls of his carefully constructed double life beginning to crumble. He had 3 weeks to figure out how to save his marriage, protect Sandral from his family's wrath, and find a way to choose love without destroying everything he'd ever hoped to accomplish with the resources his inheritance provided. 3 weeks to perform a miracle, or 3 weeks to watch everything he'd ever cared about disappear completely. The countdown had begun, and Victoria Blackthorne was already moving her pieces into position for the final devastating blow that would destroy the happiness Charles Drost had dared to steal from under her perfectly manicured nose. The game was almost over, and she had every intention of winning. Chapter 8. The Breaking Point and Sacrifice. The night of the gala. Even after Chaz's dramatic intervention, her husband, the thought still sent electricity through her veins. Sandral couldn't shake the feeling that she remained an imposter in someone else's fantasy. Victoria's cruel words echoed like poison. "She's nobody, a scholarship student who works in that pathetic little cafe." Mrs. Drost, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair, approached with genuine warmth. "I'm Judge Harrison Mitchell. I had the pleasure of meeting your husband during the Henderson acquisition negotiations. He spoke very highly of you." Mrs. Drost. The name still felt foreign, like wearing borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. "It's nice to meet you, Judge Mitchell. Your husband is a remarkable young man," the judge continued, clearly unaware of the tension that had preceded this moment. Not many people in his position would have the courage to stand up for what's right. "You must be very proud." "I am," Sandral said softly, her eyes finding Chaz across the room, where he was deep in conversation with several board members who looked less than pleased with the evening's developments. The judge moved on, and Sandral found herself once again standing alone, watching the social choreography of wealth and power play out around her. She'd changed into a different dress, one that Chaz had somehow procured in the 20 minutes after Victoria's humiliation, a stunning navy gown that fit her perfectly and probably cost more than her mother's monthly medication. How did he even... She'd started to ask when he'd presented it to her in a private room the hotel manager had provided. "Marcus is very resourceful," Chaz had replied, his hands gentle as he helped with the zipper. "And I always keep emergency solutions on hand for impossible situations. Is that what I am? An impossible situation?" He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face with such tenderness that her throat had tightened with emotion. "You're my wife," he'd said simply, "and I will never let anyone make you feel ashamed of that again." But now, watching, the careful way conversation stopped when she approached, the polite but distant smiles, the whispered exchanges behind gloved hands, Sandral wondered if love was really enough to bridge the vast chasm between their worlds. "Well, well," a familiar voice purred behind her, "if it isn't the blushing bride." Sandral turned to find Victoria Blackthorne approaching with 2 other women who looked like they'd stepped from the pages of a society magazine. All 3 wore expressions of perfectly polite venom, the kind of smile that preceded a verbal assassination. "Victoria," Sandral said carefully, her chin lifting despite the anxiety clawing at her chest. "I don't believe you've met my friends," Victoria continued with false warmth. "This is Catherine Westfield and Margaret Ashford. Ladies, this is Sandral—" "I'm sorry, what was your maiden name again?" It's so hard to keep track. Henry, Sandral replied quietly, aware that several nearby conversations had paused to listen. Henry, Victoria repeated thoughtfully. Not one of the Boston Henrys, I assume, or perhaps the Newport Henrys. No? How strange. I thought I knew all the prominent Henry families. Margaret Ashford, a woman whose plastic surgery made her age impossible. To determine, tilted her head with mock curiosity. And where did you and Charles meet, dear? I'm always fascinated by modern love stories. Sandral felt heat rising in her cheeks, but forced herself to answer with dignity. We met at a cafe where I work. How quaint, Catherine Westfield murmured, her tone suggesting that working in a cafe was roughly equivalent to working in a sewage treatment plant. And what do your people think of this sudden elevation in circumstances? My people? Sandral repeated, confused. Your family, dear. They must be over the moon that their daughter managed to... Well, let's just say they must be very proud. The implication was clear and cruel and designed to humiliate. Victoria watched with satisfaction as Sandral's composure began to crack, her face flushing with embarrassment and rising anger. My mother is proud that I'm happy, Sandral said quietly. That's all that matters to her. How beautifully naive, Victoria laughed, the sound like breaking crystal. I suppose when you come from nothing, any advancement seems like a fairy tale. But surely you realize this can't last. I'm sorry. Darling, look around you. Victoria gestured to the opulent ballroom with its crystal chandeliers and marble columns. This is Charles's world. These are his people, his obligations, his destiny. Do you really think a sweet little nobody from nowhere can fit into all this permanently? Margaret leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried to everyone within hearing distance. My dear, we've all heard the rumors about your mother's medical bills. $200,000, wasn't it? Such a coincidence that Charles came into your life right when you needed that kind of money. The words hit Sandral like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. Around them, the circle of listeners had grown larger, society vultures drawn to the scent of scandal and social bloodshed. It wasn't like that, Sandral said, her voice barely audible. Of course not, Victoria agreed with false sympathy. I'm sure you genuinely believe you love him. But be honest with yourself, sweetheart. If Charles Drost were Charlie Nobody working at that little cafe alongside you, would you have fallen so hard so fast? The question was devastating, because it forced Sandral to examine the timing of their relationship, the way his intervention had saved her mother's life, the way she'd let herself be rescued when she'd always prided herself on independence. That's enough. Chaz's voice cut through the crowd like a blade, and Sandral looked up to see him striding toward them, with fury blazing in his eyes. Victoria, I told you to stay away from my wife. Charles, darling, we were just getting acquainted. Victoria replied innocently. Girl talk, you understand? Sharing stories about how you two met, discussing the timeline of your relationship. The timeline, Chaz repeated dangerously. Well, yes, it is interesting how quickly things progressed once. Sandral's mother became ill. Some might say the timing was rather convenient. Sandral watched her husband's face transform into something she'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, every inch, the ruthless businessman his father wanted him to be. When he spoke, his voice carried generations of inherited authority. Victoria, you have exactly 10 seconds to walk away from my wife before I destroy your family's media empire so completely that your father will be asking me for a job by Christmas. The threat hung in the air like a sword, and for the first time since Sandral had known her, Victoria Blackthorne looked genuinely frightened. The society women around them had gone silent, recognizing the kind of power that could reshape their entire world with a phone call. Charles, surely you don't mean... Victoria began. 5 seconds, he said quietly. Victoria left, her friends trailing behind her like the remnants of a defeated army. The crowd began to disperse, conversations resuming with the careful casualness of people pretending they hadn't just witnessed a declaration of war. "Are you all right?" Chaz asked, his hand finding Sandral's arm, his expression softening back into the gentle concern she knew and loved. "I'm fine," she lied, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Sandra, I need some air," she said quickly, pulling away from his touch before she could break down completely in front of 500 strangers. "Just give me a minute." She escaped to the hotel's garden terrace, where the night air was cool against her flushed skin and the sounds of the gala were muffled by glass doors and distance. The city sparkled below, beautiful and indifferent, while her world crumbled around the foundations of doubt that Victoria's poison had planted. She was standing there, trying to catch her breath and make sense of the chaos in her heart, when she heard voices from the terrace below. Victoria and her friends, apparently, continuing their character assassination in private. "Poor Charles," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "He's so blinded by whatever spell that little nobody has cast that he can't see how she's using him." "It's textbook gold-digging," Margaret agreed. "Sick mother, medical bills, conveniently timed romance with the one man who can solve all her problems." And the way she looked at him tonight, Catherine added with a laugh, like she couldn't believe her luck. Which, let's be honest, she can't. A girl like that landing Charles Drost, it's like winning the lottery. "The real tragedy is what this is doing to his family," Victoria continued, and Sandral could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "Harrison is beside himself. The board is questioning Charles's judgment. There's talk of reconsidering his position as heir if he continues this madness." "Can they do that?" Margaret asked. "Of course they can. Charles might think love conquers all, but money conquers love every single time. Mark my words. Within 6 months, either she'll leave him for someone who can offer her more, or his family will force him to choose between her and everything he's worked for his entire life." "And if he chooses her?" Catherine prompted. Victoria's laugh was cold and certain. "Then he'll lose everything, his inheritance, his company, his position in society. And when he's just another man with a modest trust fund and no real power, how long do you think little Sandral's devotion will last?" Sandral pressed her back against the stone wall, tears streaming down her face as the cruel words battered her from below. The worst part wasn't their cruelty, it was the seed of truth buried in their accusations. She had let Chaz pay for her mother's treatment. She had married him knowing what his wealth could provide. And while her love for him was real, undeniable, how could she prove to the world, or to herself, that money hadn't played a role? "The only way this ends well for Charles is if someone helps him see reason," Victoria continued. "If someone who truly cares about his future helps him understand that this infatuation is destroying his life." Standing alone on the terrace, listening to women who represented everything Chaz's world expected him to value, Sandral felt something shatter inside her chest. Not her heart, that was already broken. Something deeper, the naive belief that love could bridge the vast inequalities between their worlds. Victoria was right about one thing. This couldn't last. Not because Sandral didn't love him. She loved him desperately, completely, with every fiber of her being, but because loving him meant wanting what was best for him, even if that destroyed her. She thought about Harrison Drost's disapproving gaze tonight, the board members who had cornered Chaz with urgent whispered concerns. She thought about Victoria's threats and ultimatums, and the impossible choice between love and legacy that was tearing Chaz apart. And she realized what she had to do. The letter was the hardest thing she'd ever written. She sat in their tiny apartment, their sanctuary, their secret world, and poured her heart onto paper while her mother slept peacefully in the bedroom, recovering beautifully from surgery that Sandral could never have afforded on her own. My beloved Charlie, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't look for me. By the time you could find me, I'll have made sure it's impossible to change anything. I want you to know that everything between us was real. Every laugh, every touch, every whispered promise in the darkness, all of it was the truest thing I've ever experienced. You saved my life in that cafe, not with your money, but with your heart. You showed me what it felt like to be cherished, protected, loved unconditionally. I will carry that gift for the rest of my life. But I can't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. I can't be the wedge that drives you from your family, the scandal that destroys your reputation, the choice that costs you your legacy. You were meant for great things, Charlie. You were meant to change the world, to use your resources and your heart to help people in ways I could never imagine. I won't be the anchor that keeps you from that destiny. Victoria was right about one thing: I don't belong in your world. Not because I'm not good enough, but because our worlds are too different to bridge without one of us losing everything that makes us who we are. If I stay, you become the man who gave up his empire for love. If I go, you become the man who loved deeply enough to let go. I choose to let you go. Take care of my mother. She loves you like the son she never had. Build the foundation we dreamed about. Help families like ours. Be the man I fell in love with, the one who sees problems and fixes them, who sees pain and heals it. And maybe someday, when you're changing the world and saving lives and being everything you were meant to be, think of me and know that letting you go was the greatest act of love I could give you. Love always and forever. Sandra, P.S. I'm keeping your grandmother's ring, not because it's valuable, but because it's the only piece of our happiness I can take with me. I hope she would understand. Sandral left the letter on their bed, beside the simple wedding photos that Tanya had printed for them. She packed only what she'd brought to their marriage: a few clothes, her medical textbooks, the small jewelry box her mother had given her for her 16th birthday. She looked around the tiny apartment that had become their world, memorizing every detail. The kitchen where they'd learned to cook together, the couch where they'd spent hours talking about their dreams, the bed where they'd discovered that physical love could be soul-deep, transformative, sacred. At the door, she turned back one last time, her heart breaking with the finality of goodbye. Somewhere across the city, Chaz was probably just leaving the gala, maybe wondering why she hadn't answered his texts, looking forward to coming home to her arms and her laughter and the peace they'd built together. He would find only emptiness and a letter that would hurt him more than Victoria's cruelest words ever could. But sometimes, Sandral thought as she closed the door on the only happiness she'd ever known, love meant breaking your own heart to save someone else's future. Sometimes, love meant walking away from everything you wanted, so the person you loved could have everything they deserved. Sometimes love meant sacrifice so complete, so devastating, that it felt like dying. But she would rather die than be the reason Charles Drost became less than he was meant to be. So, she walked away, carrying his ring and her broken heart, leaving behind the man who had taught her that she was worthy of love, even if she wasn't worthy of keeping him. Chapter 9. The Fight for Love. 6 weeks after Sandral's disappearance, the letter had been sitting on Chaz's desk for over a month, read so many times that the paper was beginning to disintegrate along the fold lines. Every word was burned into his memory like a brand, but he kept reading anyway, searching for clues he might have missed. I choose to let you go. Those 5 words haunted him more than any threat from his father, any scheme from Victoria, any ultimatum from the board. Sandral had chosen to sacrifice their marriage to save his reputation, and the nobility of it made her absence even more devastating. The investigators found something, Marcus said, entering the office with coffee and the first hopeful expression he'd worn in weeks. Finally, Chaz replied without looking up from the letter. He'd already spent nearly $1 million on the search. Private investigators, security firms, technology experts who could track digital footprints, all of them had come up empty. Sandrell Henry Drost had disappeared as completely as if she'd never existed. Tanya Rodriguez has been avoiding you for weeks, Marcus continued, but she's here now and she says she has information about Sandrell. Tanya appeared in the doorway with red-rimmed eyes and a determination that reminded him painfully of Sandrell. She's killing herself, Tanya said without preamble, settling into the chair across from his desk like she was preparing for battle. Chaz's head snapped up, his heart hammering against his ribs. You've seen her? You know where she is? I've seen her, Tanya confirmed grimly, and if you don't do something soon, you're going to lose her permanently. Not because she stops loving you, but because she's destroying herself trying to prove she doesn't need you. Where is she? Chaz was already reaching for his car keys. First, you need to understand what you're walking into. She's working 3 jobs again, back at the cafe, tutoring pre-med students and cleaning offices at night. She's taking a full course load, trying to graduate early so she can prove she doesn't need your money for her future. And her mother's treatment? Tanya's expression darkened. She's been trying to take over the payments herself. Partial payments, delayed payments, working with the hospital on plans that are eating up every penny she earns. Elena is getting her treatments, but barely. Chaz felt sick. All of this, Sandrell's sacrifice, her determination to prove her independence, was because she believed Victoria's poison, because she thought their love was somehow tainted by his wealth. She's living in a studio apartment that makes her old place look like a palace, Tanya continued. Eating ramen noodles, studying until 3 in the morning, getting maybe 4 hours of sleep before her first job. Why are you telling me this? Because she's miserable. Tanya's voice cracked with emotion. She tries to hide it, but I've known Sandra since we were kids. She's not living, Charles. She's just surviving. Then why won't she come home? Because she loves you too much. She thinks loving you means letting you go, letting you have the life your family wants without her dragging you down. The address. Tanya gave him lead to a part of the city that Chaz had never seen, where buildings crowded together like wounded animals seeking shelter. Number 1247 Elm Street was squeezed between a check-cashing store and a laundromat. Chaz sat in his car for nearly an hour, watching the building, trying to work up the courage to face the woman who had walked away to save him from himself. When she finally emerged at just after midnight, heading to what was probably her 3rd job, he almost didn't recognize her. Sandrell looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, thin in a way that spoke of too much stress and not enough food. She wore simple clothes and moved with careful efficiency of someone who had learned to conserve energy. She was still beautiful. Even exhausted, she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. But the light that had drawn him to her was dimmed to barely a flicker. He followed her to an office building where she worked cleaning until dawn, then watched her walk the 6 blocks home instead of taking a bus, probably saving the fare money on. Friday evening, he was waiting outside the cafe when her shift ended. "Hello, Sandra," he said quietly as she emerged into the night air. She froze, her keys halfway to her purse, her face cycling through shock, joy, pain, and finally a carefully constructed mask of indifference. "Charles," she said formally, "what are you doing here?" "Looking for my wife. I'm not your wife anymore. I left, remember? I chose to let you go. You chose to sacrifice yourself for someone you thought I was supposed to be. But Sandra, what if that person isn't who I want to be?" She resumed walking, forcing him to fall into step beside her. "It doesn't matter what you want. You have responsibilities, a family legacy. The only person I care about depending on me is walking away from me right now." He caught her arm, Gently, "Sandra, stop, please. Look at me." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I renounced my inheritance," he said quietly. That got her attention. She spun around, her eyes wide with horror. "You what?" "I walked into my father's office and told him I was choosing my wife over his money. I signed papers renouncing any claim to the Drost fortune and resigned from every position I held." "Charles, no, you can't have done that. Your family, your future, everything you've worked for, everything I've worked for is standing in front of me, looking like she hasn't eaten a decent meal in weeks." He stepped closer. "Sandra, I don't want a legacy built on choosing money over love, but without your inheritance, I'm just Charlie, the man you fell in love with, the man who's perfectly capable of building his own life with, the woman he loves. People will say I took you away from your family. Let them say it." His voice was fierce. "Sandra, I've spent my entire life worrying about what other people think. I'm done. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I bought you a new ring, not with Drost money, but with money I earned myself." "How?" "Consulting. Turns out people value my business knowledge even without my family name." He opened the box to reveal a simple band with a perfect diamond. "It's not as fancy as my grandmother's ring, but I bought it with clean money." Sandral stared at the ring, tears finally spilling over. "Charles, I can't. I won't be the reason you lose everything." "You won't be. You'll be the reason I find everything that actually matters." He took her hands. "Sandra, I love you. I love your stubbornness, your pride, your determination to save the world one patient at a time. What if it's not enough? What if love isn't enough to overcome all the differences between us? Then we'll fail together," he said simply. "But Sandra, what if it is enough?" She looked up at him, this man who had given up $1 billion inheritance, for the chance to convince her to come home. "I kept your grandmother's ring," she admitted quietly. "I hoped you would. I wear it on a chain around my neck, hidden beneath my clothes where no one can see it." "Can I see it?" With trembling fingers, she pulled the thin chain from beneath her sweater, revealing the vintage ring. It caught the streetlight and sparkled like a star. "I never stopped being your wife," she whispered. "I just stopped believing I deserved to be." "You deserve everything," he said fiercely. "You deserve a husband who chooses you every single day over everything else in the world." When she kissed him there on the sidewalk, it tasted like forgiveness and new beginnings, and the kind of love that really could conquer anything. "Take me home, Charlie," she whispered against his lips. "Which home?" "Wherever you are," she said simply. "That's home." Chapter 10. Love Conquers All. 1 year later, the garden behind St. Mary's Hospital had been transformed into something ethereal. White roses climbed trellises forming natural archways, soft lighting twinkled from every surface, and rows of chairs faced a simple altar where two people were about to prove that authentic love could overcome any obstacle. "I still can't believe you chose the hospital garden," Tanya said, adjusting Sandral's veil, delicate Belgian lace that had belonged to her maternal grandmother. "This is where our real story began," Sandral replied, smoothing her wedding dress. "Where Charles proved love meant more than pride, where he proposed, where I learned that some things are worth fighting for. The past year had been a whirlwind of challenges and triumphs. Chaz had been true to his word about choosing love over inheritance. Harrison Drost had not taken his son's defection quietly. There had been lawyers, threats, and media campaigns, but Chaz had weathered it all, building a successful consulting firm that specialized in helping ethical businesses grow. "The groom is getting nervous," Marcus announced, appearing in the doorway. "He's been checking his watch and asking if you've changed your mind." "Tell him I haven't changed my mind," Sandral laughed. "I'm not about to start now." Elena appeared beside them, radiant with health, her hair thick and lustrous, her eyes bright with joy. "He'll come around," she said, referring to Harrison's absence. A father's love is stronger than pride. A soft knock interrupted them, and an elderly woman stepped into the room with graceful authority. Silver-haired and elegant, with warm brown eyes that made Sandrel's breath catch. "You must be Sandrel," the woman said with a transformative smile. "I'm Evelyn Drost, Charles's grandmother." "But you're—" Sandrel began. "Dead." Evelyn laughed like silver bells. "Very much alive, dear. I've been in Paris watching my family. And from a distance, I had to meet the woman who made my grandson choose love over money." The string quartet music drifted through the garden, signaling the ceremony's beginning. The processional was simple but perfect. Tanya walked down the aisle in pale pink, followed by Marcus, escorting Elena. The gathered guests, hospital staff, cafe customers, friends from their charitable work, rose as the bride appeared. Sandrel walked alone, a symbol of her independence, but felt surrounded by love. At the altar stood Charles Drost, not the billionaire heir, but Charlie, the man who had given up everything for love. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, "we are gathered to witness the renewal of vows between Charles and Sandrel, two people who have proven that true love can overcome any obstacle." When it came time for vows, Chaz surprised everyone by pulling out a worn piece of paper. "Sandra," he said, his voice carrying clearly, "6 months ago you left me a letter that broke my heart and changed my life. You wrote that letting me go was the greatest act of love you could give me. But Sandra, the greatest act of love wasn't letting me go. It was coming back." Sandrel cried openly, not caring about makeup or the watching crowd. "I promised to spend every day proving you made the right choice. I promised to choose you over everything else that doesn't matter." When it was Sandrel's turn, she spoke from her heart. "Charles, you saved my life by showing me what unconditional love felt like. You taught me I was worthy of being chosen, worthy of being fought for. I promise to stand beside you as we build something beautiful together." As they exchanged rings, his grandmother's vintage band and the simple one he'd bought with earned money, a commotion arose in the back. Harrison Drost had arrived, looking uncomfortable but determined, but it was Evelyn stepping out from behind Harrison that made Chaz gasp audibly. "Grandmother?" he whispered. Evelyn smiled and raised her hand in a small wave, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams continued, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Again. Charles, you may kiss. Your bride." The kiss was perfect, tender, passionate, full of promise. When they broke apart, the garden erupted in applause. Harrison began walking toward them. The crowd parted as he approached his estranged son. "Charles," Harrison said when he reached the altar. "Father," Chaz replied, his arm tightening around Sandrel. "I came to apologize," Harrison said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it, "and to welcome my daughter-in-law to the family. I've spent months watching my son build something remarkable without my money or connections. He's happier than I've ever seen him. I was wrong about what Charles needed." "And what's that?" Sandrel asked quietly. "A partner who makes him better than he thought he could be." The family reunion that followed was tearful but perfect. The celebration continued with dancing, laughter, and joy that comes from witnessing true love triumph. "So what happens now?" Sandrel asked as they danced. "Now we build the foundation we've been dreaming about," Chaz replied. "The Henry Drost Foundation. Your medical knowledge, my business experience, and all the love we can pour into helping families like yours." "Families like ours," Sandrel corrected. "We're a family now." 6 months later, the Henry Drost Foundation opened its first free clinic. Elena cut the ribbon with steady hands, cancer-free and radiant. "My daughter dreamed of being a doctor to help families like ours," Elena told the crowd. "Today, that dream becomes reality." The story of Charles and Sandrel Drost became legend. The billionaire who chose love over inheritance, the scholarship student who walked away to save him and returned to build something extraordinary together. For Charles and Sandrell, dancing. In their kitchen, while their first child kicked against Sandrell's growing belly, it was simply truth. Love conquers all, but only when you're brave enough to fight for it. They had won each other, the right to love openly and completely, and the chance to make the world better, one family at a time.